All right, so welcome everyone to our webinar today. I see there's still people coming in, so let's just give it a moment. Yeah, 15, 16 participants at the moment, so let's wait a little moment more. For the ones who just now joined already, I hope you had a good day so far in Belgium or in Europe. With not too much dark. For the ones who are in Europe, here in Brazil, it's sunny. So if you are still looking for a place to go in the winter time, come to Brazil. Borders are open. You can enjoy sunshine here. So always welcome. Let's give it a small moment before I start with a small introduction. For the ones who are in the call already right now, so in case you don't know who I am, my name is Tom Maas. I'm the president of the Belgalux since June this year, and I'm also responsible for the Lufthansa airline group here in South America. So let's wait one more minute till we'll start, and give it one more minute. All right, maybe already I start sharing my screen. So with a small introduction. So as I already said initially, so I hope you can see my screen now. So maybe Mathieu, you can give me a thumbs up if you see my screen. Okay, fantastic. So yeah, so as I said earlier, my name is Tom Maas. I'm the president here of the Belgalux here in Brazil, the Belgian, Luxembourgian Chamber of Commerce here in Brazil. We are located in Sao Paulo. We have several antennas, what we call in Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia, for instance, and other larger cities here in Brazil. What is the Belgalux doing? The Belgalux is basically a networking platform for the Belgian companies here in Brazil. We try to exchange ideas, come together, share best practices, also help each other with the ultimate goal, also then, of course, to improve our businesses. And this year, the Belgalux has done some changes. First of all, we had, of course, the year of the pandemia. So a lot of things that we normally do, we could not do anymore. But what you see here on the next slide is we did a really big series of webinars this year, very interesting webinars, very different topics, talking from taxes to art. And so I think that was a very nice start into the year that we did with these webinars. At the same time, we used the time to come up with a new team. We've been working hard in the background now to come up with new ideas for 21. And I hope to be able to share these with you soon, these new ideas, maybe in January when we do a happy hour to welcome the new year. Today, I'm very happy that we have basically the highlight of our webinars today. We are going to talk about 21. So finally, we're not talking about the year 20 anymore. Now we are finally can talk about the year 21. For me personally, coming from the airline industry, you can imagine that the year 20 was a very, very difficult year. And I think for most of you as well. And for me, basically the year 21, I already basically classified, and you might remember the movie Star Wars. There's this one episode which is called A New Hope. So for me, the year 21 for me is a new hope. And sharing my views from our industry, we see that actually flight bookings are slowly to start again. And I think that the quicker we get the vaccines distributed, we will also then see a general upturn in the whole industry. But that being said, I don't want to spoil any messages. We have here numerous people here today in the call, in this webinar, who know much more about the future of 21. And I would like to thank BNP Paribas and Credendo, and especially also the Belgian consulate, general consulate here in Sao Paulo, for organizing this super interesting webinar. For me, again, the highlight of the year from all the webinars. And with that, I would like to hand over to Mathieu Brandes, our General Consul of Belgium here in Sao Paulo, who will moderate the session with you today.
Hello, everyone. Good morning still to all of us who are in Brazil, and good afternoon for those following us from Belgium. So as Tom said, I'm Mathieu Brandes. I'm the Consul General of Belgium here in São Paulo, and I'm more than happy to be here with all of you today. Large number of participants for the very last webinar of the year of the Belgian-Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce here in Brazil on the 2021 economic outlook for Brazil and Latin America. As Tom said, and we all know actually the year that we have behind us was a horrendous one. I saw that for the first time, the Oxford English Dictionary chose not to name one word of the year, describing 2020 as a year which cannot be neatly accommodated in one single word. And instead, it chose a long list of words from coronavirus to lockdown, face mask, and also, of course, webinars to try to condense and represent this unprecedented year, which in fact left most of us speechless. So what do we have on the shelf for next year? Even though we are living a second wave in many parts of the world, we also have the first vaccines being administered. So what's on the shelves? Which parameters on the political side, on the economic side, we need to take into account into business planning with Brazil and the rest of Latin America? To speak about this, we have today two very senior economists from two top-tier institutions, which will bring to us not only their best crystal balls, but also extensive knowledge and analysis from Brazil and Belgium with a view on this region. The first speaker who will take the floor is Rafael Secchi. Rafael Secchi from Credendo, the Belgian export credit agency. Rafael is a senior country risk and sector risk analyst for Brazil and Latin America, among others, at the risk management department of Credendo. He has a university degree in economic science at the Catholic University of Louvain, and a university degree also of complementary studies at the Institute of European Studies. He's also regularly commenting on the global economy in the Belgian press. He will be followed afterwards by Gustavo Arruda, who's the chief Brazil economist for BNP Paribas, based in Sao Paulo. Gustavo is responsible for forecasts and analysis on Brazil for the trading desks, investors, and the press. He's also a frequent speaker in events and seminars, a permanent member of Ambina's macroeconomic committee. And before joining BNP Paribas, he worked on the trading desk and in many other financial institutions, including West LB, Latin America in New York. He has a master's degree in economics from the Getulio Vargas Foundation, a bachelor in sciences in economics from the University of Sao Paulo, and he also teaches occasionally in macroeconomics and monetary policy at the Getulio Vargas Foundation. That's about it for me at the moment. After the presentations by our two speakers, we'll have time for a Q&A session. And for the Q&A session, I will be joined by Laurence Beaumanoir, head of corporate coverage at BNP Paribas Brazil, and her colleague Sergio Machado, who's the head of Latin Global Market Corporate Sales at BNP Paribas Brazil as well. So with no further ado, I will leave the floor to Rafael for his presentation, which will zoom in, starting from Latin America to go all the way deep down in Brazil. Rafael, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Matthew, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you indeed about the outlook for Brazil and Latin America under the risk angle. So I hope you will better understand what might be the most important country risk and regional risk to expect in 2021. I will start first with Latin America. And with no surprise, I start with the risk number one of the year, the COVID-19, where, as you know, the health situation has been gradually improving since September. However, as you all know, we've seen second waves appearing in the EU, the US, and now also in several parts of Latin America, which means that the COVID is clearly going to remain an important risk clouding the regional outlook in 2021. When we look at the evolution of the economic activity, economic growth this year, it really shows how severe has been the shock. When just you look at the whole region, Peru, Argentina, Mexico, expected to contract between 9 and almost 14% this year. And in fact, the region has been the most hit, economically speaking, by the COVID. Worldwide, in fact, all economies have been contracting except the Guyana for domestic reasons. And the prospects for next year are obviously more positive, but we expect only a partial rebound next year because the COVID evolution, but also some specific country factors will largely, I would say, show how the situation might evolve in every country. The regional outlook indeed is a fragile recovery, in fact, and let me give you among the most important risks to expect for the region, starting of course by the COVID economic damage and the lingering related uncertainty that will still hit the region next year. We don't expect a full and wide vaccination for all countries in the region by the end of next year. It will take time, obviously, but at the same time, we don't expect all Latin American again to implement the very harsh containment measures that were implemented this year. We might have, in fact, some containment measures in place, but also this combined with more limited fiscal space. Those two factors surely will reduce the extent of the recovery next year. A second element to mention is that other recession factors we saw this year will still partly bite next year. And here, for example, I might think about the tourism factor, which is only expected to slowly recover over the year. A third point that was already concerning before the COVID and that's further deteriorating are the public finances. In fact, the public debt levels were already elevated in the region. And as you can guess, the COVID has just made things worse. We've seen 4 of the 6 sovereign debt defaults happen in Latin America. So, and in South America, in fact, it was the case for Suriname, Ecuador, and Argentina. We, at priori, don't expect other sovereign default to happen in Latin America next year. But of course, it will be a risk to take into consideration in the medium term. And the fourth risk, not to underestimate, is of course the very severe impact on the social situation in the region. As we see that there are higher social instability risks to happen on the back of higher unemployment and poverty. But also we might see rising political tensions next year, as in several countries you have elections that are scheduled. I'm notably thinking of Ecuador, Peru, or Argentina in South America. This being said, there are fortunately also some positive news. I would say we can expect some gradual external support for the region, starting by China, the first export market of the region. And this support might come through higher imports, notably of commodities, because the region relied still a lot on the commodities and so also on prices. And also higher investment of China might be expected over the year, even if maybe not as much as we saw in the past. The second support might come from the US, the first trade partner of Latin America. We can expect a strong rebound as of the second or third quarter of next year. And we might also see the region benefit from a softer approach by the new US president, Joe Biden, maybe not or less with some countries where there might be some populist leaders. I will say just a brief word later on. And then last but not least, also several countries will still be able to get the support from financial institutions, as we saw this year, and which can partly explain why there has been some resilience in the foreign exchange reserves on average in the region, with accepted, as you can see on the chart, countries like Bolivia, Suriname, or Argentina. And on Argentina, I can also just say a brief word because it's also the second most important economy of the South America. Not surprisingly, the outlook is very challenging because Argentina has been the second most hit by the COVID after Brazil. It has been having its third recession in a row, and then the economic situation is very, very tense, with a very explosive social and economic situation. Therefore, the current negotiation with the IMF will be difficult to complete, and even if there is a deal, the planned austerity measures will be really difficult to take in the context I've just explained. So in this overall context, we can also expect tense elections next year, but also the capital controls that are at the moment there, they are probably likely to be also maintained and affect investor confidence. Now, after Latin America, let's move to Brazil. Of course, the outlook, again, is very dependent on the COVID. And there we expect a moderate recovery at best. As you can see on the graph, the evolution, in fact, is not that surprising. When we look at the forecast, and I'm sure Gustavo will say a word on that, it just confirmed, in fact, the disappointing performances we've seen since the end of the commodity boom. In fact, since 2014, more or less. Indeed, thanks to a strong economic support, Brazil has avoided the sharp contraction we've seen in other important Latin American countries. But this being said, and clearly the COVID has been and will remain the dominant risk next year, given the resurging virus. There's a clear threat now of a second wave, and this might, of course, hit the recovery next year. On top of that, the labor market has been badly hit by the COVID, with millions of job losses, when the key sectors were shut down during the containment measures. So in that context, obviously, the economic recovery will only be partial next year. If the vaccination campaign is effective, meaning wide and fast, it might improve the economic outlook, but it's not the baseline scenario. The outlook, of course, is clouded by the COVID, but also by the expected gradual withdrawal of fiscal stimulus, and also by still cautious investments because of the still uncertain economic climate. Of course, there might be some support from the Chinese demand, also from higher commodity prices. That's clearly expected, but it won't be enough because the recovery in global demand will just be progressive and slow. Another point to take into consideration when we look at the risk is the foreign policy. We might ask ourselves, will Brazil risk isolation or be pragmatically open to the US, notably on trade policy and climate? It's an important question because we've seen that the acceleration of Amazon deforestation has had an impact of the risk perception and reputation risk among international investors, which might also be hit by pressures on boycotts on trade, for example, on the agribusiness sector. So we can, I think, expect more pressures from the Biden administration, but also from the EU on interlinking trade and climate policy in the future. The political context is also important, of course, because of the presidential elections in 2022, which will be in sight, of course, and might play also a role on the policy making as the year goes on. Certainly when it comes to the fiscal policy and reforms. And here, of course, it allows me to come to the really a key risk for Brazil, I think, is the state of the public finances. because as you can see, there has been a constant deterioration of those public finances, notably when you look at the public debt. We know, of course, that the wide government cash transfers to informal workers and poor households have had a positive impact on Bolsonaro's popularity. So I think, of course, that we can expect an extension of those transfers, even though probably at less generous levels. At the same time, the government will be meeting the dire situation of the public finances with a public debt around 100% of GDP, which is one of the highest level in the emerging world. And then also the fiscal deficit expected around 16% of GDP. We don't expect the constitutional ceiling on spending to be again suspended next year. It's also not the expectation of the markets. But all in all, of course, the government and fiscal policies will be clearly challenging next year. And in the meantime, we see that Brazil is more or less increasingly issuing short-term debt to meet its financing needs, which of course will also increase the fiscal risk next year and beyond. In this context, there is still a mitigating factor, I would say, is the fact that most of the debt is denominated in real, which means that the public debt repayments are not exposed to the exchange risk, so to the depreciation of the real. Now let me come to two ratings we have at Credendo when we assess the short-term risk. I will say a brief word on the commercial risk, which is in fact the equivalent of the business environment risk. And then I will say a word on the short-term political risk. For the commercial risk, Brazil, it's in the highest risk category. It's not that surprising, of course, in the economic context. And in fact, all the main indicators are at a historically low levels. Brazil is living its worst, deepest recession is since over the past 30 years. The interest rates are historically low at 2%. And this combined with a moderate inflation makes that real interest rates are now negative. Of course, it's supportive for the economy, but it also shows the severity of the economic situation. And we expect those rates to remain quite low because of the gradual recovery that I said which should happen next year. Then the real is also at a historically low level against the US dollar. Indeed, the year has been very hard for the real, which has lost more than 40% since the beginning of the year against the US dollar. And here again, it was due to large capital outflows at the beginning of the year. And we can only expect some improvement when the recovery really takes place. And if there are also some guarantee for the markets in terms of fiscal sustainability. In this context, of course, the payment track record of Brazilian companies has deteriorated over the months with more payment delays and non-payments. And we think that it might worsen further before it gets better next year, especially when the economic support is withdrawn. And then the structural reforms are also an important topic, of course, when we talk about the business environment risk. Because there are still several obstacles, I would say, notably the infrastructure gap, the red tape, the tax system. Those are on the desk of the government, and it might do quite some benefits, not only for the country at a time of economic difficulties, but also erode its image among investors. But the thing is that it remains to be seen to what extent the persisting COVID might not delay again also the implementation of the reform. So all in all, the outlook, I would say, for the commercial risk is of a slow and gradual improvement amid the persisting uncertainty of the COVID. And then the last one, it's about the short-term political risk, where in fact we assesses the liquidity of a country. And here, well, Brazil had been downgraded at the beginning of the year at Credendo from 2 to 3 on a scale from 1 to 7, 7 being the highest risk level. It was due to the impact on the foreign exchange reserves and on the short-term debt, and also reflecting the collapse in exports and the higher debt service ratios to come this year and next year. But this being said, as you can see on the graph here, the liquidity of Brazil is quite safe, notably looking at the difference between the foreign exchange reserves and the short-term debt. It's really big, and it really shows how huge are those reserves. And in fact, over the year, they have stabilized after initial difficult start. And on top of that, you have this the current account deficit, which was quite important last year, which has mechanically improved this year due to the sharper contraction of imports compared to the exports, which means that now, of course, Brazil is much more favorable situation. Based on the very latest data we have received, this slight surplus or small deficit might, of course, widen next year, indicating, in fact, a slower recovery in exports. But I would say that all in all, the outlook here for the short-term political risk is, it's, I would say, from stable to positive. That's really the expectation of the development we have for 2021. On that, I will give the floor to Gustavo, who will continue now on the world, I think, world expectation and also on Brazil. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So good morning, good afternoon. Are you guys seeing me? I don't know. Yeah, okay, good. So sorry, I was a bit late. I was in our quarterly press conferencing to talk about global and also Brazil. So it's a good time to discuss that. And basically, my idea here is to talk about 2021 in a sense that where we believe at PMP that globally the situation will be way better, of course, with decent support from the governments, central banks all across the globe, but also a year where we have two challenges, right? So first, we have the central bank, or I mean the vaccine being put in place, right? So globally, and that's a big challenge, as Rafael said before, that and how to do it, right? So in terms of implementation, approvals, how long would it take? And this will affect the global economy, will affect Brazil as well. And also the EM world particularly, which brings me to the fiscal challenge, right? So Brazil will need to stabilize and to grow again, but without such an immense support from fiscal policy, which is different, by the way, when we think about developed market, right? When I discuss with the other guys in the team, US and Europe, the idea here is to keep doing fiscal policy together with monetary policy. In EM and Brazil in particular, we will have an economy that needs to adjust, and in the case of Brazil, to cut almost 8 to 9% of GDP in fiscal policy in 1 year. So one good news on that front is most of these cuts needs to be done in exceptional measures, which is not being the case structurally in Brazil, right? So if you think about Brazil in the recent years, you remember that probably you heard about a lot about more structural spending, right? So was a pension reform, administrative reform, and all this type of measures that takes time, takes a lot of negotiations in Congress, and sometimes the result is very different from what you planned at the beginning. In terms of these measures that needs to be done in 2021, most of them expires naturally, and this is a good thing, right? So in the sense of the economic or the fiscal sustainability. Of course, this creates some risks, right? And the main risk is for the activity, because Brazilian recovery ended up being way stronger than I imagined, to be honest. Actually, the contraction of the full year ended up being way better than we thought at the beginning. So if we go back, if we thought about, we discussed that in August, I would tell you that we were expecting a contraction of -7 in Brazil, which is not that different from other countries, other EMs. And then now we are expecting -4.5, right? So way better. And it's basically explained by a very aggressive fiscal policy, right? So from this about 8% of GDP that we had this year, 5%, almost 5% came from the cash transferring program. So fueling people with a lot of money, and all this, a big part of the population, almost 35% of the Brazilian population have received some type of incentive, and they spent it all, right? So that's why you are seeing, if you discuss that with corporate companies, especially in the retail business, they are super happy because they never imagined such a recovery from an unexpected event that we are seeing now. So going to 2021, Brazil need to balance back, right? So we have to find the proper pace of recovery without such amount of incentives. So, and this brings us some good news and probably some challenges here. So the good news is that Brazil had the Brazilian economy, in particular, part of the population have saved a lot of money during this process. Not the person that they received the cash transfer from the government, but the more rich people, or the richest part of Brazil. These guys used to buy a lot of services. Since we are at home, nobody buys services. So several numbers about savings shows that Brazil increased decently the amount of savings in the economy. So helps when we think about the dynamics of an economy being vaccinated. Part of the Brazilian economy will go back to the business and buy services. So the economy will be back. The challenge part is that the retail business will not be as brilliant as we are seeing now, right? Because again, has to go back to reality, and reality is that is the one that the unemployment rate is that we should peak at 15-16% before starting to go down. So retail business has or have to be at that level, right?
Gustavo,
so,
sorry,
yeah.
Gustavo, can just an intervenence. We do not see the share your screen.
I know.
You don't want to share it, just to be sure.
No, I'm not sharing now. Just the comments. I will show just 2 or 3 charts. I have a full chart book here that we can share to everybody. But just to tell you the story here and how this
No, I just
out.
wanted to be sure because I didn't know if you were asking, do you see my screen? Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's okay. So anyway, and then trying to go through the conclusions, and then I show you a few charts here. First, the growth in Brazil will be a challenge, but positive, because China will be growing fine, will be doing fine, global economy will be doing fine, and liquidity globally will be okay, will be great. In terms of numbers, we are expecting a 3% growth, which is not brilliant because the carryover, the way the economists say, the growth that you bring from 2020 to 2021 will be already high, but will be divided in 2 blocks. So first semester, not that good. Second quarter, second semester, way better. Inflation, we saw a huge pickup on inflation in Brazil this couple of months. Huge shock from commodity prices, some pass-through from effects to the economy. Going to next year, we are not expecting that anymore. We are seeing now the currency against dollar going back to 5, just around 5 today, right? 5.0305. Our strategists believe that we could go even further down, appreciation to 4.25 to 4.6. 4.5, 4.25. So this also helps inflation. And then finally, with the economy, with this balancing and the currency doing okay and inflation doing fine, the central bank shouldn't be in a rush to increase rates, right? So yesterday we had a bit of surprise from the central bank, so indicating that they may decide to start normalization at some point 2021. We were expecting 2022. But not in a rush. I mean, my view here is that the central bank would only start to increase rates in Brazil at the very end of the 2021. And the main reason is without fiscal policy, Brazilian economy will have to wait a lot only on monetary policy alone. Without fiscal, we need to go for monetary policy. So the situation in terms of the perspective of the economy next year will be way different when we compare to what Brazil is facing now, with a boom of consumption, the economy doing fine. So that will be different, right? So just closing the remarks here, I would say that I have, I don't know, 5 messages here about Brazil next year. First, global will help Brazil, right? China, extreme liquidity will help Brazil. Second, this first part of the year will be softer, and then the first part will be soft, the second part will be good, and in line with what we are expecting globally. Inflation will come down in terms of in month over month, but in annual basis, when we think 12 months, will go up just because of base effect. So we had a very, very strong inflation now. This will contaminate the 12-month inflation. Third message here, or fourth message here, fiscal policy matters a lot. So it's not about just helping the economy, but just to guarantee that the fiscal policy will be sustainable in Brazil. Investors and real economy will care about that, because if Brazil does not, the Brazilian government does not stop spending, someone will have to pay this bill, right? So, or with tax increase, or with something else. So that's a very important message. We believe that the government, besides all political pressures, will end up delivering a decent fiscal result next year, although not perfect. And then final message here is interest rates. Brazil never had such a low interest rates, and we believe the central bank will be able to live with that for some time. Not anymore until 2022, but at the end until probably September this year. The risk here is to postpone to 2022 if inflation does not perform, right? So that are the key messages. I can discuss afterwards the perspectives of reforms, politics, but maybe could go through the Q&A. And if I may, just to finish, I promise, I will show you just 2 or 3 pictures here to reinforce my message here. And I stop. So first, let me go jump a few here. First, commodity prices matters. So this chart you are seeing the screen, the gray line is commodity prices, the green line is GDP in Brazil. As you can see, it seems that we have some correlation, right? And the way I think that is not that Brazil is a commodity currency alone, or a commodity country alone, but I can think about commodities as a proxy for global growth. So if the global economy is fine, Brazil will be fine. If the global economy goes down and collapses, Brazil collapses. Of course, as you could see here in 2016, we have our own evils as well, right? If Brazil goes bad because of domestic reasons, we go even worse than the global economy suggests to our economy. Second chart here and here. The V recovery ended up being way stronger than imagined, pushed by retail sales. So people are buying goods like crazy, right? Going to next year without all the incentives, this needs to go down to reflect the size of the labor market in Brazil. So the size of the unemployment rate we have. Here, just to give you a sense how much money Brazil has spent as percent of GDP during the pandemic. So Brazil ended up being one of the countries that spent the most. Now it has to go down. So that's why it's super important. Regionally, this may interest you. So regionally, the recovery is different in Brazil. as it had been before. So in São Paulo, things are already above the previous, the pre-COVID levels. By the way, this is Brazil. So we have all the regions here. So São Paulo is doing fine, South is doing fine, but when you go for Rio, Minas Gerais, and Northeast of Brazil, things are more complicated. So that's important. When we think about 2021, we should expect some dichotomy. Some regions in Brazil work way better without fiscal support, which like São Paulo, and other regions need fiscal support, like the Northeast. And it had been before the crisis, we were seeing such a different performance. We should see this back again in 2021. And then let me jump a few slides here, just to remind you how Congress is important in Brazil. So this is a very interesting study about the power of powers in the government. So executive power, so is the president super powerful, or is the legislative power super powerful? So it's important to remember that in Brazil, the different from other countries, legislative or Congress is super powerful. So the government needs to work with Congress if you want to see something done. And then I finish with the cost of labor in Brazil. That's one biggest challenging. Brazil had already a labor reform. This is a bit, this is back 2018, so may improved a bit. We didn't have still an update from there, but still nothing like a big change here. So Brazil is still very costly to hire people, and this affects the recovery as well. So let me stop here and then open for the chat. I hope I didn't extrapolate much my time.
So Gustavo, if you allow me, I would like to make some comments about the client activity that we've been seeing in the bank, which I think is quite important for the people here. So first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and to have this opportunity to present our views. What we had during the pandemic situation was a clear, we had two main outcomes from clients. The first one was the famous sentence like cash is king. So all the companies, they looked for us to receive financing and to remain liquidity and to remain to keep cash available for the future needs. So we were able to support some global clients of the bank in a very important transactions during this period, but also some mid caps and small companies that we have a relationship in Brazil. So it's our common DNA to support the clients everywhere, and exactly what BMP did. If you look around and check the BMP presence and the BMP behavior during the pandemic, it was the biggest bank in the low-end part. And the second, it was a huge volatility in FX and rates. So any asset made, even we saw oil trading below zero. So we never saw this before. It happened. So we had a very big demand from clients for protection. So they were looking to buy protections for any type of derivative to protect future needs, to future gains, or even liabilities that they had. So we had a big increase on that. And one thing that raised my attention, to be honest, is a change on common behavior from corporate clients. So they used to trade and they used to deal doing hedging, only using regular forwards. And we start to see some clients more open to look for options structures. And why, I think, why was that? And I made the question for several clients to understand why you changed the policy, why you looked for other alternatives. Because it was a clear perception that we were in a disruptive mood. So in a sense that we didn't have a fair value for the currency. So the volatility was so huge that they would not to step in something like buy dollars or sell dollars in a price that's totally out of the market condition, okay? So, and to summarize on my end, so we were able to support our clients, but let's just focus on the positive message here. So after Gustavo and Rafael presentation. we were, since the beginning, more constructive and more positive view for Brazil and for Latin America. And I would say for Brazil, we have a very out of consensus projection for FX rate in the end of 2021, that is 4.25. If you look what's the current level of the dollar BRL nowadays, which is like 5.15, 5.10, we are talking about a big develop that will come in 2021, which I think is doable for several reasons. But I will stop here, and I'm more than happy to take questions. We have Matthew and Laurence doing the Q&A for you. But if you have any questions about the client activity, more than happy to take it. And of course, with Gustavo and Rafael here. Thank you one more time for the opportunity.
Laurence, your microphone is muted. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Always the case now. No, sorry. So thank you for inviting us. Indeed, very pleased to be in this WebEx. With Matthew, we will take the question that has been sent. So please do not hesitate to continue to send the question. And I will jump in the first one. Talking about Brazil is usually a country about, let's say, foreign investment on program on privatization and so on and so forth. The question is the following, and I will try to answer for a part, and I will give the floor also to Gustavo and Rafael to complement. The question is about, let's say, the trends that we foresee in terms of investment coming in Brazil related to the privatization program. So I think that the big number are the following. So of course, in fact, this year there was less privatization made, in fact, in the country for the obvious reason versus, in fact, last year. So I think that the number of auctions this year was in the range of 10 auctions versus, in fact, last year in the range of 35. So there is still, in fact, a huge pipe. What we understand, what we see, and on the interaction we have with the client, I mean, who are investor in different sectors, is that there is, in fact, still interest, in fact, in the program which is coming in front. So for the knowledge for everyone, so we're talking, let's say, about investment in airport, in auction, like energy, like port, like railroad, on things like that. So my feeling is, in fact, we should see, in fact, this agenda coming again probably in the middle of next year. But I would like to have also the view of you, Gustavo. How do you see, in fact, for this, Gustavo plus Rafael, how do you see in terms of agenda, let's say, coming from public auction? This is something which is very key, in fact, for the country in terms of foreign investment activities and so on and so forth, which also help, in fact, the domestic trend. How do you see the thing? Is my feeling, let's say, that it should recover mid next year exact, or you see do you see it differently? Rafael, Gustavo?
Sure. Well, from my side, I can tell you that what we have been learning from the government is that the agenda will be back next year. Actually, we are seeing already some auctions. We had the sanitation auctions recently with
Yes.
a good demand. Electricity also with a good bid recently. But next year, we have a very interesting pipeline. I think it was yesterday or the day before, the government confirmed the auction of the airports. So the 22 airports, probably for March, already adjusted in terms of price because the sector is in trouble now. But I'm pretty sure that the demand will be there. Some other things which are more related to Congress, though, it's more difficult, right? So like privatizations per se, I don't think we'll be seeing much. But in terms of concessions, I do see a big demand, a big pipeline for next year.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. Rafael, do you want to complement, or
no? But I agree with Gustavo. I think that indeed, I mean, being active on that field will also matter, especially in the difficult economic situation the country is living. So I guess we can expect definitely something to come already as of next year and next.
I think we have another question, which is more related to fiscal. Do you see in the economic situation, which is the one of Brazil, and you both mentioned, in fact, the fiscal situation. Do you see any possibility to have, let's say, incentive to either importation or exportation due to the reduction of let's say, how do you say that, imposto in Brazilian, so meaning a reduction, in fact, of taxes and so on and so forth, to be able to continue to push the economy? Or how do you foresee that, considering the current situation?
I don't know if I can take that. Just to say that there's no big chance of incentives. What we can see, indeed, it's probably a diminishing in the import tax, because the government is really fighting as they can with the amount they have to try to bring Brazil to an average level of tax on import. But in terms of incentives, it's very difficult to expect something. If anything, we could see smaller incentives going forward instead of more incentives.
I was expecting your answer, but still, you never know. It could be a chance. I think there is another one which is for you, Sergio, on the FX, and so on and so forth. So I think this is also this is about, let's say, the expectation, in fact, of the, I would say, the recovery of the real. So usually expectation seems to be quite clear, end of 2021. But how do you see the question to, let's say, $1 million? How do you see during the year this evolution, starting from now?
So the first natural outcome in Brazil is that we expected a lot of volatility, but now I think the volatility will go in the right direction for ourselves. So in other words, when you see what happened with BRL compared to other currencies, other emerging market currencies, the BRL moved a lot compared to currencies and countries that face the same problems like Brazil. Let's use the example of South Africa that our strategy team always highlights. So the South Africa has also a problem with fiscal deficit like Brazil, but the currency didn't move as much as BRL. So in other words, there is a big gap between BRL and other currencies that we need to close this gap. Because I'm not saying that we are in a perfect situation, that we are ready to be considered and to have let's say, a very good situation on the fiscal side, but we are not so bad that the market priced BRL so worse compared to other emerging market currencies. So coming back to the answer, I see a constant trend of improvement in the BRL looking forward. Of course, we see some volatility, but the trend is quite clear. So we should see a BRL stronger in the coming months. So there is a lot of liquidity available everywhere. Brazil is quite cheap, which is good. There is this privatization agenda or concession agenda, you name it, that we expect very concrete investments in different sectors. And the companies, they need to invest because we need we are in a country that's quite big and there is a lot of demand. So that's why I feel positive that and also very low interest rates. So there is a big motivation to invest more in the country. Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you very much, Sergio. If you allow me, I'll go back to the previous questions about the trade liberalization, and I see here a comment also on the EU-Mercosur. I think that both sides are trying to work on making this happen, but unfortunately, and as Gustavo also mentioned, this is not going to be for next year yet, and I don't see also much movement on trade liberalization in terms of reduction of tariffs and so on. Last question that if you allow me, that I would like to present to the speakers is about maybe a little bit higher than Brazil, about the question of more global, about the way and the impact that the COVID crisis had on the trade chains. We see, for example, here and there news about the fact that Brazil has no more. Some industries in Brazil don't have the basic materials necessary to continue the production. What are your views on this, and how serious it is, and in which way is the situation different for Brazil than for the rest of the world economy? Thank you. Gustavo, would you go first?
Yeah, it's up to Rafael.
No, but you are the Brazilian specialist, so I will let you for the.
So yeah,
in terms of economic structure, I'm sure you might bring your insight.
Okay, well, in terms of the structure of the economy, indeed, what has been happening is that there's disruption. Actually, we are paying the bill because of the stop of the chains during the process of the COVID, right? So the lockdowns. To be very honest, I doubt any sector would expect such a decent recovery of demand as we had here. So it's important to remind that Brazil had a deep recession in 2015 and 16. And from there, the recoveries ended up being so very, very mild. So the chains and the production ended up thinking the same, right? So, okay, it's a very deep recession, a lot of, probably the unemployment rate will go way up. So no demand we should not expect the demand to pick up. And because of the fiscal supply, the fiscal money through the pockets of the population, the demand exploded, as I showed before. So the big question, and I'm seeing that in some talks with the clients, is that yeah, everybody's surprised. Nobody has inventories to such a demand, so it will take time to normalize, probably a few months. But nobody wants to go first in terms of preparing and assuming that this is the way Brazil will grow going ahead, right? Because inputs are expensive now. So if you go fast and then buy a lot of inputs, assuming that your demand will be amazing next year, and it failed, you'll be stuck with a very high inventories with a very high costs. So the expectation here is to be on wait and see mode. So you do it your job, you produce how much you have on demand, but don't go further than that because we don't know, right? And the numbers in Brazil are showing that. So the capacity utilization in Brazilian history, in Brazilian industry here, is back to 2010 levels. I think it's way before the crisis, but it seems that will not sustain. When we have the confidence surveys, more soft data, right? So you ask for the managers what you expect going forward. They already saying that, yeah, the demand ended up good, but will not keep like that. So that's the view here. So good for now. Could if they would produce even further, to sell even further, but they don't want to be the first to press the pedal.
I think we have a very, very last one. Maybe Rafael, you would be able to tackle in 30 seconds. I would say it's about the debt profile of Brazil and the tenor of this debt profile. Can you comment how it has, let's say, changed during the pandemic and the type of risk it could raise, let's say, for external stakeholders?
Well, during the crisis, as we have seen, indeed the government has, the central bank has issued more short-term debt. In fact, it has definitely changed from long-term to short-term debt to benefit from the lower borrowing cost, which means that the average maturity of Brazilian debt has clearly reduced. But of course, it means that Brazil is also more exposed to refinancing risk on the markets, notably already as of next year, to roll over the debt, which means, of course, it's more vulnerable. It has improved, but it makes also more vulnerable. So I think at certain time it will have to be again a better balance in the future. It's really a short-term reaction, I think.
Thank you, Raphaël. Mathieu, I think it's your time to close.
As a master of ceremony, I would like to thank very sincerely Raphaël and Gustavo and Laurence and Sergio, of course, for their time and availability, for the openness with which they share their insight, the Belgalus, of course, for organizing these events, which I see, gathered a strong participation, which is normal. We are still traversing rough waters, and it's important to gather all the important information to go through this periods. I wish all of you, since it's the last webinar of the year, excellent end of the year. Good, well, I was going to say good parties, but safe parties, and keep safe, and hope to see lots of you by webinar or presentially next year. Thanks again. Bye-bye.